Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where we are now in our third season of helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchuk, dietitian, running coach, twin mom, and fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchuk Performance Nutrition, I've spent over a decade helping runners learn to fuel their bodies better, unlock their best running performances, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. This podcast is all about helping you become the very best runner you can be by teaching you the running-specific nutrition, training, and recovery strategies that you need to reach all your wildest health, fitness, and running goals. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, join me each week as I share my best advice, interview guest experts, and talk to everyday runners who are conquering their goals by tapping into the power of performance nutrition, with a side of some myth busting too. And if you're looking for even more tips, resources, and strategies for runners, you can find me on Instagram at Steph the Runner's Dietitian or by visiting www.stephanienatchuk.com. All right, let's dive into today's episode. Start today's episode, I just want to really quickly invite you to download my free fueling guide and strength training guides for runners. Currently available as a handy little bundle for you all in one at the link in the show notes. So just to give you more information, in this free fueling guide, you're going to find my top fueling tips for runners. As well, in there, I've put together some meal ideas and even a couple of recipes for your pre and post run fuel. We've also got some suggestions for what to fuel with during your run to make sure that you just have the best overall performance possible. If you've really been struggling to understand what to eat, when, where to start when it comes to supporting your running with better nutrition, this guide is here to help you kickstart your running journey. The other guide that I mentioned is my strength training guide for runners. We know that runners are notoriously bad at consistently getting their strength training in. So this guide includes both a PDF resource, it's got some tips, some guidelines, as well as a link to my series on YouTube where I walk you through all the exercises in this program, giving you some suggestions on proper form, how to modify if needed, how to progress things if needed. This is a really great beginner's guide to strength training for runners who want an effective but efficient full body workout that is going to support the key muscles and movements you need to run stronger and help stay injury free. So once again, both of these guides are available as a handy little bundle. So you just click on the link in the show notes, enter your email address once, and both of the free guides are going to get sent to your inbox right away. I really hope that you find these guides helpful and that they support you and your running goals in the most effective way possible. So without further ado, let's get into today's episode. All right. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, where I'm excited today to talk to you about planning your intra-race fueling strategy. And going beyond just the general recommendations and just kind of the, okay, well, you need, 60 grams of carbs per hour and however much electrolytes and that sort of thing, kind of taking a step beyond just the general recommendations around intra-run fueling and intra-race fueling to actually help you plan your unique race day strategy, and also understanding how that changes from race to race. And there's a couple different factors that I want to get into that are going to influence what you should be planning for and how you should be approaching your intra-race fueling, and some tools that you can use to put all of these different pieces together. So if you're listening to this and you are currently, starting training for a fall race, you've got something coming up in the next couple of months, then this is the perfect time to start thinking about this, the perfect time to start planning and practicing and training with some different options so that when your race day gets closer, you feel really confident and really comfortable with what you're doing. And the reason that I want people to start thinking about their race day nutrition well in advance is because, we need time to maybe try some different things and practice with some different options and figure out what we tolerate best, figure out logistically what works best for us, figure out how we're going to put all the pieces of our race day strategy together. But also for a lot of runners who maybe haven't experimented or haven't used a lot of intra-run fueling before, we're also looking at this factor of needing to actually take the time to train our gut. And we're talking like weeks and weeks of gut training, which means that you are consistently and strategically increasing the amount and the frequency of fuel and fluid that you're taking in to build up an ability to tolerate and to digest more fuel and more fluids during your long runs and races. So this is something that we can't rush. This is something that doesn't happen overnight. And we just need to slowly work on that gut training and build up that tolerance so we can reach, say the 60 plus grams of carbs per hour that we're striving for. And so when we look at intra-run fueling as a whole, I don't even endless, countless options, right? You go into your local running store, you scroll through your social media feeds, looking at the advertisements that you're getting. You go onto websites where you can buy all types of different fuel products and everything. And it just starts to get incredibly overwhelming. Where do I even start? What do I need? Should I be using gels? Are gels bad? Are they too high in sugar? Are sports drinks okay? Are they not? And it just starts to become I don't even know what the first step is here. And so most runners, really at the end of the day, end up using things that they just happen to see advertised the most, right? We just try the product that we consistently are seeing out and around. Or we start to use things that our friends are using, start to use the things that are maybe most readily available. And in some cases, for a well-educated runner, you would maybe also start using things that are going to be available on the race course that you're going to be participating in. So if at certain aid stations during your race, they're going to be giving away a specific sport fuel product, then that's a great product to try during your training runs and train with so that you can rely on using what's available at the aid stations rather than, it being a brand or a product you've never ever tried before. And you get to the aid station and you're like, oh yeah, okay, well, I'll take a gel. You've never had a gel before. This might not go well for you, right? But if you have consistently trained and practiced with that brand of product, then you know that maybe you don't need to bring quite as many, or you can, take an extra one or two and save them for when you need them. So those are some different ways that we can start to think about what we're going to do for our intra-run fueling plan. And the reality is that we just need to start. What you start with is less important than the fact that you've just started somewhere. And this is with trying different products, trying small amounts of a product. I've had runners who have very sensitive guts and they're starting by taking off they're taking a quarter of a gel at a time. They're taking a sip of a sports drink at a time, the smallest amount to just get that ball rolling on their gut training, which is perfect because we just need to start somewhere. But where we can start to get into trouble is if we are, really have zero direction whatsoever on how we're going about planning our intra-run fueling strategy, or if we're trying to simply copy and paste the products and the strategy for every single event that we do. And this may not be ideal for every and all scenarios. And I want to explain why. So I want you to imagine that you are going to run a marathon. And for the first marathon you're going to run in this scenario, you are drinking a sports drink that contains 60 grams of carbs per liter. So in every 32 ounces of that sport drink, you are getting 60 grams of carbs. And let's say in that year, you're going to run 2 marathons. And so the first marathon that you run happens to be on a really hot day. And so because it's hot outside, it's going to be hot outside going into this race. And so you're like, okay, I'm going to make sure that I bring extra of my sports drink. I'm going to make sure that I'm consuming a lot. I'm really going to
be aware and intentional about drinking and making sure that I'm taking in a certain amount of fluids at certain benchmarks during the race. So say every 5K, I'm going to make sure that I get through this much of my sports drink. And, per hour, maybe you're consuming even a little bit more than a liter of fluids per hour because it's a really hot day, and that's not unreasonable at all. Now, you have a really solid first marathon. It's a hot day, but you really feel like you nailed it. You didn't hit the wall, you didn't overheat, you didn't get dehydrated. You had a really solid, you were really happy with your performance during that marathon. So, whatever, however minutes later, the second marathon comes around. Now, this second marathon is taking place on a day that is a lot cooler, a lot breezier, and it's just not nearly the same environment as that first one. But you really thought that fueling strategy that you had during the first race was perfect. And so you're like, you know what? That worked so well for me during my first race that I'm going to just copy and paste the exact same plan. So you bring that same sports drink. So the same sports drink that has 60 grams of carbs per liter, and you get it on the race course. And because the day is much cooler, much windier, you're not feeling all that thirsty. And honestly, you're kind of forgetting to drink a lot during that run. And so you're you're sipping from your bottle every so often, but you certainly are not intentionally drinking as much as what you would have been on the hotter day. And so you get to the halfway point of that marathon and you've only drank about 500 milliliters of the fluid. And so during that second marathon, you end up hitting the wall and you come away and you're so confused and frustrated because how on this crazy hot day when people around me were dropping like flies and struggling so much with the heat, how did I have this great run that day? And then on this day that it was cool and windy and I had all this extra training under my belt, how did this plan not work for me? Why all of a sudden did this, did I hit the wall in the second marathon? But imagine, right? If you were maybe drinking a liter or more of that fluid, right? That 60 gram carb per liter fluid, you took in 60 grams of carbs or more per hour of running that marathon. Whereas on the second one, if you're maybe getting to 13 miles and you've only sipped a little bit here and there and taken in maybe half a liter, about 16 ounces by the 13-mile mark, right? You maybe hit 30 grams of carbs during that first part of that race, right? Maybe not even 30 grams of carbs during the first part of that race. And so no wonder you hit the wall because the reality is, yes, your fluid requirements on that second run were a lot lower than on the first run, right? But your carb requirements are the same. And so taking that into account, not thinking about that, and not adjusting your plan for the different conditions and maybe having some gels with you to take with your fluids because you're probably not going to be drinking as much, or to increase the concentration of the sport drink if you could tolerate, if that was okay for you, but just switching up your strategy because it is, two very different environmental scenarios. Or perhaps you are consuming a really high carb sport drink mix that per liter is giving you 100 grams of carbs per liter. And so on a cool day, you might consume 500 mLs per hour, and that 50 grams of carbs per hour is sitting really nicely in your stomach. But on a hot day, you find yourself drinking a lot more. Maybe you're drinking double that amount, and now you're ending up with GI issues because that's just more carb than you've trained with and more carb than you can tolerate. So you might adjust your fluid intake for the environment up or down, but kind of accordingly, you didn't adjust the fueling and the electrolyte plan for the fact that you might be drinking more or less. So these are some of the things that, if we have a fueling strategy that really, really works for a particular training block or for a particular race, then we definitely want to remember the products we used, remember the amounts that we used, and, kind of keep tabs on what worked well and why it worked well. But we also have to remember that we want to revisit that plan, revisit that strategy, and maybe make adjustments for the other races that we're going to be doing. Because at the end of the day, both underhydrating, right, becoming dehydrated is problematic, right? We definitely don't want to become too dehydrated during a race because that will interfere with performance. But we also do need to be careful around overhydrating and taking in way more fluid than we need, especially over many, many hours of racing. We want to be getting enough fuel, but not so much that we wind up having gut issues. And then we also want to make sure that we're replacing electrolytes appropriately so that we aren't, contributing to GI issues or again, contributing to both dehydration or overhydration. So there are 3 parts to an intra-run fueling strategy. There's our fluids, our fuel, and our electrolytes. And we need to think about each of these factors independently and plan for each of them independently. Now, of course, there are a lot of scenarios, like say a sport drink mix, where we can have our fluids, our fuel, and our electrolytes all come together and we're just consuming one product during a race. That doesn't always work though, depending on how much fluid we're planning to consume. And of course, depending on other factors like, preference and logistics of carrying all that fluid and other things like that. So, it is possible to combine these things into single products, but we still need to be planning and thinking about them as 3 independent factors. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is our fluids. And of course, we consume fluids either as plain water, right? We're drinking water, that is a fluid, some type of sport drink. But also, there's other fluids that we could consume as we are running. Definitely things that are more common if you're running ultras, that's going to be like juice, maybe pop, having popsicles or freezies on the race course or something like that. Broth, if you're doing like ultras or doing runs in colder weather, you might be consuming like broths and stuff like that of course are going to be contributing to your fluid consumption. So that's pretty straightforward. Now, there are a number of different ways that we can assess how much fluid we need. And looking at it from 2 perspectives, right? We can either look at actual sweat losses or actual fluid losses via sweat during training, or we can look at it from the prediction lens. Both are very valuable and both give us a lot of good information. So I'd highly recommend using both of these strategies, like looking at it from both angles, looking at actual losses post run, and then also using the predictive tool that is available now, a new tool that's rolled out in the past year or so in order to see and plan for upcoming training and race day events. So looking at it from a predictive standpoint, there is this fantastic online tool called the sweat rate calculator. So the website is just sweatratecalculator.com, and you put in all of the different data that it asks for. At this point in time, it's only validated for running and cycling, not other sports, but you can use it and kind of like, get a pretty good idea and sort of extrapolate from there. There are also limits on the ranges of duration and distance and things like that there as well. And so if your activity falls outside of what you see, all it means is that the tool has not been validated for environments or situations outside of what you're seeing as the limits on the tool. And so again, we can use that to, have a starting point at least, right? And then just maybe scale up a little bit or scale down a little bit for things that fall out of the limits on the tool. But it certainly is better than just winging it, right? Like it's going to give you a lot better information than just having nothing to go on. So it might not be perfect and give you perfect data for every and all scenarios, but I do think it's really helpful to see at the very least a starting point. So what this tool does is you put in things like your body size, the speed you'll be running, the duration, and then environmental factors like heat, humidity, wind speed, indoor, outdoor, etc. And it gives you a prediction of your sweat loss rate. So how much sweat you are predicted to lose during that event on an hourly basis and for the total duration of your event. And so this is fantastic. In general, I think it's really helpful, and I encourage all of my clients to utilize this on a regular basis. But especially if you're going to be traveling for a race and expecting much warmer or cooler temperatures than what you've been used to training in, then it's really helpful for getting that prediction and being able to plan ahead for something that might be different than what you're used to in your normal training environment. So that's looking at it from the predictive equation perspective. Looking at your actual sweat loss rates, one of the simplest ways to do this is to look at your pre and post run weights to assess your fluid losses, right? However much weight you lose from before a run to after a run. And then you would subtract any fluids that you drank during the run. The total amount lost is going to be the amount that you lost via sweat for the most part. I mean, obviously it's not perfect. You've lost some muscle glycogen in there and stuff like that too, but it gives us a pretty good idea. So you can do that over time and collect some data on that information so that you kind of know, again, in these different environmental conditions, what are my sweat loss rates or my hourly sweat loss rates for those different situations. Keeping track of that, again, to use as a race day planning tool. There are also wearable devices, so things like the Nix biosensor that you can use to assess both sweat and electrolyte losses. There's other ways of assessing electrolyte losses, which we're going to talk about as we go on here, but the Nix biosensor also collects and estimates your total fluid losses from sweat as well, which is really handy. So there's a couple of different things that we can use here to kind of look at what your fluid needs are going to be for the day of the race. And the goal for fluid replacement is to take in at least 70% of those losses. The key being to drink early and drink often, so not waiting until we get dehydrated to start the hydration process, because of course that can contribute to gut issues, that can contribute to poor performance, hitting the wall, muscle cramping, etc. We want to start the prevention of hydration very, very early on, like within the first couple of miles of a race, and just sipping regularly throughout, increasing our intake of fluid on those hot or more humid days. So understanding and establishing your fluid needs in a variety of settings, using a variety of different methods, really allows you to plan and prepare for whatever your race day might bring. So then you can say, okay, in these conditions, my estimated fluid needs are going to be 1.5 liters an hour, let's say. So if I'm going to be consuming 1.5 liters an hour of fluids, and I am, confident in my ability to do that, then how much can I consume the amount of carbohydrate I need in a sport drink mix? And if I am drinking 1.5 liters of my sport drink, how much fuel is that going to give me? And is that enough? Or do I need to supplement with some extra carbohydrate sources? Or on the flip side, if it is a colder day, cool, breezy, whatever, and maybe I'm only going to need like 0.5 liter of fluid per hour. Then if I'm looking at only requiring 0.5 liter of fluid per hour, then chances are I'm not going to be able to get by with just consuming a sport drink because it's not going to give me enough carbohydrate per hour. So I'm going to have to supplement and bring something else. And so knowing that information going in allows you to train your gut, look at your preferences, figure out the logistics of these different scenarios. So you're not stuck with like only one thing that you are consuming or only one option for what you've trained with. And then you might be a little bit screwed if the environment on the day ends up throwing you for a bit of a loop. So that's the fluid piece. The second piece is your fueling. And of course, your fuel is going to be predominantly carbohydrates. Most scenarios, most runners, most race distances, we're looking at carbohydrate being the fuel source that we're talking about here. If you are an ultra racer, then you're probably going to want to include some protein, some fat as well, but that's a little bit of a different story and a little bit of a different situation. You've got a little bit more in terms of options for the foods that you're consuming and those sorts of things during ultra events. And so for road races, kind of half to full marathon length, we're looking at fueling with carbohydrates. So for these endurance events that are going to take you longer than 2 hours, we want to be consuming at least 60 grams of carbs per hour. And as that duration gets a little bit longer, consuming 90 grams of carbs per hour can actually support performance even more.
And here our options are things like sport foods. We got our gels, chews, of course, carbs that we consume in a sports drink, candy, dried fruit. There's a lot of different options. I see people asking all the time, like in Facebook groups and stuff, they'll say, oh, I had this thought, like, can I fuel with XYZ? Oh, I was looking at the nutrition information for some particular thing that I buy, and I noticed that it's, got this amount of carbs in it. Like, could I eat that on a run? And, what do you think? Could I have it? Like, you can eat whatever you want on a run. Like, there's no like running police that are going to come and arrest you for eating something weird during a run. If it's giving you enough carbohydrate and it doesn't have so much protein or fat or fiber that it's like affecting your stomach and it's not giving you gut issues and you can hit your goals and everything is great, there is no wrong answer here. So the sky's the limit on different options. But of course, things like your gels, chews, etc. are convenient, and they're specifically tailored and formatted with the most rapidly digesting carbohydrates that we can consume. They have something called mixed transportable carbohydrates in them, so that you're getting different types of carbohydrate, so a mixture of glucose and fructose generally, that you are able to maximize the absorption of sugar in your gut. And so that's something that other food options, other products just might not provide. They might be, predominantly high in fructose or predominantly high in glucose. And then the total amount that you can absorb on an hourly basis would be limited by that. So that's kind of the thing. The key here, though, is to understand like how much of a certain item you would need to consume per hour to meet your fueling target. And so one example is the little applesauce pouches. So a lot of people are intrigued by the idea of eating and consuming these little applesauce pouches as opposed to consuming gels. And of course, that makes sense because applesauce is absolutely delicious. And I'm so glad. I mean, I guess I could always eat applesauce. You can eat applesauce anytime you want because you're a grown adult. But now having young children who like applesauce, I am so grateful that like I also get to eat applesauce as much as my kids eat applesauce. It's wonderful. Anyway, the thing with these little applesauce pouches though is that they do not have like they're big because a lot of what's in them is water. So they, on average are only giving you about like 12 to 15 grams of carbohydrates per pouch. And if you think like the size of these pouches, if you were going to fuel, say, an entire marathon with those pouches at 60 grams of carbs per hour, like you would need a backpack full of applesauce pouches in order to get through this whole thing. And you would just be constantly consuming applesauce the entire time. So going for something a little bit smaller and a little bit more concentrated, like a gel or like candy or, dried fruit or something like that, means that you're not having to carry and bring along with you all of this like water weight that you would find in there. So to have like a couple of applesauce packets along the way just to like change things up and for a little bit of variety and to sort of supplement some other options is great. But it's the logistics. How many of these do I realistically need to consume on an hourly basis? And does that work for me? We also, of course, want to practice all of this in training to see if the logistics of it work. Again, right? How many applesauce packets are we talking about? Can your gut handle that? And training your gut with smaller amounts, working up over time to whatever your race day goal might be. And so if you're combining your fuel with your fluids as a sport drink, then understanding how much of that sport drink do you need to consume per hour to meet both your fluid and your fueling goals. And does that make sense based on your sweat loss rates and GI tolerance? Or if the weather is going to be, a little bit different on race day than what you've been doing in training, do you need to also practice with an alternate plan and have a plan B for your fueling strategy if that isn't going to make sense or if that isn't going to work for you? And then the third factor is, of course, our electrolytes. And as I mentioned before, there are a number of different methods available for testing the electrolyte levels in our sweat. So understanding basically how much sodium, how much salt do we lose in our sweat. Of course, there's the wearable patch that you can purchase, the Nix biosensor. There's an app that you would download on your phone that it connects to and gives you all of this data. There's in-person sweat testing. So you can go to a clinic, go to,
offered by practitioners. So you can go somewhere in person and they will do sweat rate or sweat loss and sweat testing done for you. And there's also different companies that offer sodium sweat tests based on mail-in samples. So you order the kit, send it to you, you complete the sample collection, send it in through the mail, and then you would get your results. Of course, each of these options has pros and cons. Time, cost, needing to travel to a clinic. I was looking online. There's a company that offers in-person sweat testing, but of course they have like one location in the entire country of Canada. So, you might, depending on where you live, this might not be something that's really accessible for you. So something that's a mail-in option or a wearable patch might be much better. The other thing too is that some of these are only, something that you're completing one time. And it might be preferable to get more data points and do this testing a number of times, again, to get an idea of how your sweat composition might change based on training, say heat acclimation, based on different environmental factors, just getting a little bit of a larger picture of what's happening and how things are shifting over time. So pros and cons here of each option, but I do recommend, as an endurance athlete, having a general understanding of your electrolyte requirements is really helpful, especially if you struggle sometimes with your long runs and on race day. The missing link is sometimes that we are not adequately replacing electrolytes, and that is what's causing you to have a really hard time either in the heat or with those longer events. And of course, sodium sweat losses can range widely. I mean, some people it might be as little as 200 milligrams per hour up to like 2000 milligrams per hour or more. So there's huge range of where you might fall into, and factoring this into your overall intra-run nutrition plan is really important. It might be a factor of choosing a higher sodium sport drink or fueling option to meet your needs. So specifically looking for products that do have that higher sodium content. Or if you don't, then maybe you don't need to go out of your way to consume something that's really high in sodium. You can get by with consuming the adequate amount of gels that maybe have 100 or 120 milligrams of sodium each. And if you've got, 3 of those an hour, you're doing pretty darn good. Or perhaps you don't want to consume a sport drink. And so having electrolyte capsules or chews or something like that as part of your race day plan is, again, just going to make the most sense for your preferences. What we also want to understand is that in hotter weather, you lose more sweat and more electrolytes, especially if you are not heat acclimated. But if you've gone through the process of heat acclimation, you actually can conserve sodium to a degree. So from the beginning of summer to the end of summer, you would see a shift in the amount of sodium that you're losing in your sweat. However, if you are a very salty sweater, you may still be losing a tremendous amount of sodium, even with some level of conservation going on. So there's your fluids, your fuel, and your electrolytes. Now, you'll see sometimes sport products that contain a lot of other electrolytes, or maybe not a lot, like in terms of how much, but a number of other electrolytes. The key is sodium. So I would not recommend, going out of your way to look for products that contain a lot of potassium, magnesium, calcium, etc., because we lose those to a much, much smaller degree in our sweat. Now, if you are a very salty sweater and you are going to be racing for a very long time, then something that does include those is not, of course, going to cause harm. However, for a lot of people, especially if we're talking about half marathon running, if you're going to be out there for 4 hours or less kind of thing, then really the predominant electrolyte that you're going to be wanting to replace will be sodium. Then, of course, the fourth thing that we need to consider are your preferences. Your taste preferences, your texture preferences, your logistical preferences. And while it's really good to keep an open mind and give different things a chance, we also have to understand that everyone prefers different things. Some runners would just like the idea of having to chew something while running, like to eat a chew or food or something like that. And so they want something that's really easy to consume and just quickly get out of the way, like a gel or a sports drink. Whereas other people, the texture of gels is just like, I can't imagine. Or, if you're doing longer events and you don't want to get hungry, you might find that it's better for you to be eating and like putting something a bit more substantial in your stomach while you're running. Gels and sports drinks just don't provide the sustained energy that you want for those really long events. There are also runners who really just want to drink plain water, like flavored beverages, like sports drinks and stuff like that. Taste fatigue is absolutely real, but also for some people, just the overwhelming sweetness of constantly drinking a sports drink over the duration of a long run or a race is just bleh, right? So they want to get their fuel and electrolytes from different things like maybe gels or chews or electrolyte capsules or something like that, so that they can just drink plain water on the race course. You also might get taste fatigue during long events. So you want to have products that you can switch up to different flavors or even include different textures as you go. So maybe you're alternating between gels and chews or candy and dried fruit, or having a sports drink bottle along with some water, and just kind of going back and forth as you go. So you can switch it up for that long event so you don't get taste fatigue and then stop taking in what you need to. You also, again, like I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, want to think about what's available on the race course and factor that into your plan if necessary. So if they have a certain brand of electrolyte replacement that you're like, oh yeah, okay, maybe I want to try that in training and see if it works for me. If they're going to be giving away certain gels, just understanding how often can I get water and fill up with water? How often can I get stuff like that as I go, and factor that into what your plans are. You also might have a really sensitive gut. And even with gut training, you're still somebody that has to be a little bit cautious about what you're taking in and how much you're taking in. And you just, you're always kind of towing that line on the gut issues. So you might have to have a plan and kind of sticking to what really works for you. So there's, these other kind of logistical and, preferential things that are important to keep in mind. And having an idea of those factors, understanding and thinking through those things for yourself, it's also really key so that the plan that you put together isn't just good on paper. It also actually helps you have a really solid race day and helps you have, the performance that you deserve based on all the hard work that you've put into your training. So that is it for today. That is my step-by-step guide on planning your intra-run fueling strategy, planning what you're going to do for race day so you can cover all of your bases, think through all the things. One other thing that I should mention is also carrying, if we're talking about gels or foods or something like that, how are you going to carry them? What are you going to put your fluids in, a handheld bottle or a pack? And also knowing that different races have different regulations around what you can have and what you can't for some of those things. So looking into all of that and just really thinking about this far in advance, so you can plan, you can train, you can practice, so you have no last minute surprises, no things that totally throw you off, and make sure that, again, you just get the most out of all the hard work that you've put into your training. If you need help, so if you've listened to this episode and maybe you got some good tips, got some good advice, but you still don't feel like you know where to start, or maybe you've listened to this episode and you're feeling a little bit even more overwhelmed than you were before because you had never really thought about needing a race day plan, and now I've just added a whole extra thing to your plate that you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know where to begin with this. I really, really would love some help with mine. Then I would love to help you. I have a fantastic all-in everything you need to know online program for runners. It includes your nutrition, it includes your training, it includes coaching with me, opportunities to ask questions, get feedback, look at your unique needs and plan out your strategy. That is called the Fuel Train Recover Club. And this is a, fantastic place that you can, get everything you need, a one-stop shop to really help you create this type of strategy for yourself, help you understand more of the details of really how to become the best runner that you can be. And of course, I also offer one-on-one coaching as well. So both options are fantastic and, can be the right fit for whatever it is that you need to help you reach your race day goals. You can find details about both at the links in the show notes, learn more about how you can work with me and how we can work together to come up with a great plan that works for you. So that is all for today's episode. I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I hope that you found this episode helpful. And of course, we will see you right back here next week for an all new episode of the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast. Bye for now. The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.